Go Loud presents Ireland Crimes and Mysteries, brought to you by Revive Active, an Irish brand that has pioneered the super supplement in just one daily drink. Discover Ireland's favourite at reviveactive.com.
Ireland Crimes and Mysteries is presented by Go Loud, Ireland's leading audio publisher and the home of Irish podcasts. Find new episodes on the podcast first on the Go Loud app and on your favourite podcast platform. Welcome back to another episode of Ireland Crimes and Mysteries with me, your host Nules. Before we get into this week's case, I just wanted to give a big shout out to my wonderful sponsor Revive Active. I'm so delighted to have partnered up with them, as what sets this Irish brand apart is the science behind it. Their powdered supplements are formulated using bioavailable ingredients, meaning your body actually absorbs the ingredients. For me, the biggest benefit has been the lack of an afternoon slump. It provides that steady energy throughout the day while also supporting your immune system and your heart. It's a premium product that genuinely makes a difference to how you feel. Available online at reviveactive.com or in pharmacies and health food stores across Ireland. Now, let's get into today's story. The car was sitting in the car park at Athlone railway station. An Opel Kadett. Nothing about it to make anyone look twice. Just another car in just another car park. People walked past it on their way to the trains, and the trains kept coming and going as they always do. Families on day trips, commuters on their way home. It was the 18th of May, 1994, a Wednesday. And on that day, somebody opened the boot of the Opel Kadett. Inside was the body of a woman. She was 41 years old. She was 7 months pregnant. She had been shot in the back with a shotgun and stabbed 6 times. Her name was Philomena Gillane. Her car had ended up there after she was last seen leaving her family home outside Ballinasloe in County Galway. Today, more than 30 years later, no one has ever been charged with her murder. Today's case takes us to East Galway, the flat green farming country around the town of Ballinasloe. This is an inland part of the county, the part where farms have been worked by the same families for generations, and people know their neighbours and their neighbours' people back 3 and 4 generations. Ballinasloe itself is the main town. It's famous for its October horse fair, one of the oldest in Europe, with records of it going back to the 1700s. Every October the place fills up with horse traders and dealers and crowds. And then the rest of the year it goes quiet again, and life moves at a slower pace the countryside around it has always moved at. About 5 miles outside the town is a small village called Caltra. And just outside Caltra, in a quiet little townsland called Glebe, was a family home called Beach Lawn House. This was the home of the Gordon family. And it was here that Philomena Gordon, who would later become Philomena Gillane, grew up. Up the road from Caltra is Athlone, about 45 minutes by car. Less if you put the foot down on the back roads. Athlone is in County Westmeath, just over the Galway border. It sits on the River Shannon and is a town everybody passes through on the way to somewhere else, a railway hub. The main line between Dublin and Galway runs through it. Trains coming and going every day, people in and out, a car park where a car could sit among many others without immediately drawing any attention. Now, before I start, a word on this case. Most of what we know about what happened to Philomena Gillane came out years later. It came out in court, in trial evidence and witness testimony, in the inquest record, and in the reporting that followed. This is what I'm working from. Now, let me tell you Philomena's story. Philomena, as I said, was a Gordon of Caltra. Her mother was Noni. She was one of a big family with brothers Patrick and Martin and sisters Bridie and Mary. The Gordons were part of the fabric of the place. Beach Lawn House had been the family home for years, and the Gordons were known up and down the parish. They were at Mass on a Sunday, knew everybody at the local shop, turned up at the funerals and the weddings and the matches. The way it is in all little country villages and towns around the country. By the early 1990s, Philomena was a grown woman in her late 30s. She had moved out years before for work. She had gone up to Dublin and got herself a job as a cook in Loughlinstown Hospital, down on the south side of the city, out beyond Cabinteely. So her life was split between both places. Dublin during the week, with her job as a cook, long hours, long shifts on her feet, and then back home to Caltra to her mother and her family at the weekends and on her time off when she could manage it. This pattern was very common in Ireland at the time. People emigrated within their own country, holding down jobs in cities but going home to the country whenever they could. The bus to Galway, the train to Athlone, the lift the rest of the way from a brother or a cousin or whoever was passing. She was a working woman, single, independent. And to be a single woman in your late 30s in the 1990s in rural Ireland was a hard place to be. The country was still very Catholic. The pressure to settle down, to marry, to have a family was enormous and was everywhere around you. Especially in places like Caltra, where everyone knew your business and your aunts and your mother's neighbours all had an opinion on what you should be doing with your life. So when Philomena did meet somebody, when there was finally somebody to bring home, you can imagine the relief and the excitement. After all the years of being the working one, the cousin who was still doing the cooking job in Dublin, and the one without the wedding photo on the wall. It's a kind of unimaginable to think about it now, the pressure that was put on a woman just for living her own life. Now, to understand how Philomena ended up married to the man she married, you have to go back to the early 1990s. There was a festival on. By most accounts, it was the Listonverna Matchmaking Festival, the famous old matchmaking festival in County Clare, where for generations single people had been going to meet somebody. Philomena Gordon met a man. His name was Patrick Gillane. He was 28 years old. Philomena was about 10 years older than him, and she was actually involved with another man at the time. But there was something there. Patrick didn't have a phone of his own, so he wrote down his sister's phone number on the back of a matchbox and gave it to her. And she rang him. A while later, they met again at a country and western night in Kiltormer in County Galway. And that was it. That was the start of the two of them together. So, who was Patrick Gillane? He was from Glenbrack, near Gurt, in South County Galway, the far side of the county from Caltra. He was the youngest of 7, 5 sisters and 1 brother, raised on the family farm, about 80 acres. His teachers at Gurt National School remembered him as an average enough student, a bit of a nervous type. He had worked on the farm, done 2 years driving a lorry, worked part-time for a coal merchant. His father had died back in 1980 when Patrick was still only a teenager, and his mother had died in 1990, not long before he met Philomena at the festival. After the mother died, the family farm was divided between Patrick and his brother Kevin. So that was Patrick, a farmer from Galway, recently bereaved and 10 years younger than the woman he was about to marry. And marry her he did. On the 30th of April 1993, Philomena and Patrick were married in Knock in County Mayo, a spring wedding at the famous Marian Shrine. Knock, of course, is the place where the Virgin Mary is said to have appeared in 1879. And to this day, it is one of the most visited religious sites in Ireland. So they'd picked a very Irish, very Catholic place to be married. Philomena, after years of waiting, was now a married woman. And she was already expecting at the time of the wedding. On the 8th of August 1993, Philomena gave birth to a baby boy. So by the end of the summer of 1993, Philomena had a husband and a baby in her arms. She'd got everything she'd been waiting for in her late 30s. The little family of 3, the future stretched out in front of her. But it would not last, because by December of 1993, something was going to come out that would tear it all apart. Philomena's own sister Bridie was sleeping with Patrick Gillane. Bridie, her sister, the aunt of her new baby. They had been together during the marriage, and by Bridie's own later evidence in court, the relationship between her and Patrick had only ended in October of 1993. 2 months after Philomena's little boy was born and only 6 months into Philomena's marriage. And the way it all came out in December of 1993. Patrick arrived at the Gordon home in Caltra one night drunk, and he told Philomena in front of Bridie what had been going on. In her own house, with her own sister sitting there, the whole thing unfolded in the kitchen of Beachlawn House. Philomena turned on her sister. The two of them rowed. It was just devastating. A husband, a sister, a brand new baby, all of it gone in one night. And the rest of the family were there. The Gordons were in pieces. And around that same time, around that Christmas of 1993, there was an incident in a pub in Mount Bellew, another small town a bit further along East Galway. Philomena walked into a lounge bar looking for her husband. She demanded that he go home with her. When he refused, she struck him. And she told him there and then that she would take him for, quote, every penny he had. This was a woman who had just found out that her husband was sleeping with her own sister while she carried his child. Of course she was lashing out. And there was nothing private about what she was telling him she was going to do. She said it in front of whoever was inside in that bar. And it got even worse than the affair. This part came out later in the evidence around the case. The court was told that in December of 1993, shortly before Christmas, Patrick Gillane was alleged to have tried to strangle Philomena. After that, he admitted himself to St. Bridget's, the psychiatric hospital in Ballinasloe. It's a big institution in the town. He admitted himself in, and then he discharged himself against medical advice and left. Then, in February of 1994, at the new house that was being built for them on his family's land near Gurt, the evidence was that he tried to strangle her again. And again he admitted himself to St. Bridget's, and again he left. 2 alleged attempts on his wife, the second of them while she was pregnant, and 2 trips into the psychiatric hospital that he allegedly walked back out of. He was never separately convicted of either of those alleged attacks. And that is the account given of the marriage Philomena was in by early 1994. And there was no easy way out. Divorce wasn't an option. Divorce wasn't even legal in Ireland yet. The referendum that would finally legalise it was still a little bit off in the future. It would be held in November 1995, and even after it passed, the law would not come into effect until early 1997. So, in early 1994, if you were a Catholic woman in rural Ireland, trapped in a destroyed marriage, you could say, you had no easy way out. You could legally separate, yes, but not divorce. I mean, that's hard to credit now, but that was the country at the time. And Philomena, by all accounts, was making it known that she had a child, she had her rights as a wife, she had her name on the property, and she was not going to back down or let it go. She was not going to be the woman who lost everything because of his affair. And then, in January of 1994, something happened that nobody outside a small handful of people would know about for another 3.5 years. It would only come out at trial years later when 2 men gave evidence about it in front of a jury at Dublin Circuit Criminal Court. These 2 men said they had met Patrick Gillane in Dublin City on the last Sunday of January 1994, near the Royal Hospital Kilmainham. And they would later both tell the court that Patrick Gillane had asked them to kill a woman. He told them she worked in a hospital. He told them his wife was going to leave him and he was going to lose everything. He told them a substantial sum of money was waiting for them if they did it. They said they refused. They said they had nothing to do with what would later happen to Philomena. And they both told the court they walked away from him that day in Dublin, and that was the end of it. Patrick Gillane would deny every word of it. He denied ever meeting these 2 men in Dublin. He denied ever asking anyone to kill his wife. He called the whole idea, quote, simply ridiculous. His defence would be that this was a case of mistaken identity from start to finish, that somebody else had said those things to those men in Dublin that day, that it had not been him. All of that was years away from happening. Through the early months of 1994, Philomena was trying to live her life. She had got her job back in Dublin. She had her baby. She would travel back to her mother in Caltra at the weekends. She must have been hoping things would somehow calm down, that somehow she would be able to rebuild her life. Maybe she was thinking about what a life apart from him would look like. But things were not going to calm down. Things were moving in the opposite direction. And by May, Philomena Gillane would be dead. Wednesday, the 11th of May 1994, in the early morning, Philomena was at Beach Lawn House with her mother and her sister. She got up, she got herself ready to leave for Dublin. Bridie heard her stirring in the house. Noni said goodbye to her. That was the last time anybody in the Gordon family saw Philomena Gillane alive. That same morning, Noni and at least 3 of the Gordon neighbours heard a shot. A single shot in that quite East Galway countryside. So, I mean, you would definitely notice that. This was a place that you would not hear a gun going off normally. But of course, in farming country, a shot doesn't always mean what it would mean in a town. crows being scared off, vermin being dealt with, all matter of normal reasons. And there were reports given to Gardaí of a car and 2 men seen near the entrance to the Gordon home that same morning. 2 men who to this day have never been publicly named. Just 2 figures briefly near the entrance to a house on the morning Philomena went missing. Coincidence? I don't know. Philomena didn't arrive in Dublin. She didn't turn up for work that day. The family started ringing around looking for her. The hours went by and there was no sign of her. Where was she? Where was her car? That Opel Kadett. A fairly distinctive car. It wasn't at the family home. Where was she? Days went by. Now everybody was frantic. Family ringing around, family driving the roads. The Garda missing persons report was opened and nothing came back. Then, on the 18th of May 1994, exactly 1 week after she was last seen leaving Beach Lawn, that Opel Kadett was opened in that car park at Athlone railway station, and Philomena was in the boot. The car had been sitting there. People had been walking past it. The state pathologist examined her. The cause of death was hemorrhage and shock, caused by a gunshot wound to the back, followed by those 6 stab wounds also to her back. The weapons used were a shotgun and a kitchen steak knife. Neither weapon has ever been recovered, and later, when her inquest was held in front of the Westmeath County Coroner Dr. Pat Mangan and a jury of 10, the jury formally found that Philomena, 7 months pregnant, had died from hemorrhage and shock from a gunshot wound followed by 6 stab wounds to the back, and that those injuries had been, in their words, carried out by another person. And there is one detail about how Philomena died that came out years later at trial, and it's a hard piece of forensic evidence, this one. Court reporting at the time stated that Philomena may still have been breathing when she was placed in the boot of her own car. If that evidence was right, then part of that journey to Athlone happened while she was still alive. That doesn't even bear thinking about. The Garda investigation that followed was massive. Up to 60 officers involved at various stages. The investigation ran for 2 years intensively. They were looking for those 2 unidentified men, reportedly seen near the home that morning. They had a single fingerprint on the rear view mirror of Philomena's car. They had no murder weapons. They had a body, a car, a fingerprint, and a small rural community now living in fear and full of suspicion of each other. The whole feel of the place changes when a young woman is taken like that and nobody knows who took her. And Patrick Gillane found himself at the centre of all of it. He was arrested twice. By his own account, given later from the witness box, he was interviewed by Gardaí for a total of 96 hours across 1994 and 1995 and placed under Garda surveillance for 12 months, 96 hours of questioning and a year of being watched. And then there was something else, something that had happened only days after Philomena was found. 3 days after, in fact. A man in Dublin picked up the Irish Independent that morning, and on the front page of that newspaper was a photograph of a man's face. And he looked at that face. He knew it. He knew where he had met him. He knew his name, and he walked straight into Bridewell Garda station in Dublin and asked to speak to a guard. The detective Garda he ended up speaking to was a man called Alan Bailey. That man on that front page, I know him. His name is Patrick Gillane, and there's something I have to tell you about him. He came back again later that day, this time with another man, and with the newspaper. The other man at this point did not make any statement about a wife-killing plot. That would come later. His initial statement to Gardaí had not mentioned a murder plot at all, and his fuller account of the alleged Dublin meeting only came afterwards. But the first guy went on record from the 21st of May 1994, less than a fortnight after Philomena's death. But what the Gardaí had from both of these men was the basis for one kind of criminal case, not a murder case. The murder investigation itself was still short of what it needed. They had the ballistic evidence, they had the knife wounds, they had the fingerprint. They had the witness reports of 2 men near the Gordon house. They did not have enough to bring a murder charge, so the case ground on through 1995 into 1996, with no breakthrough on the killing itself. By the mid-1990s, the Gardaí moved on what they did have. A couple of years had passed. The two men's account from May 1994 was still on file, and it supported a charge under the 1861 Offences Against the Person Act, an old piece of legislation still on the Irish statute books. Soliciting another person to commit murder, a chargeable offence carrying a minimum of 3 years and a maximum of 10. It wasn't murder, it was asking somebody else to commit the murder. And this was no everyday charge. Soliciting to murder was so rare in this country that years later, when Catherine Nevin was convicted of soliciting men to kill her husband, she was described as only the second person in the history of the state to be convicted of it. The first was Patrick Gillane. And so in September of 1996, more than 2 years after Philomena's death, Patrick Gillane was put on trial at Galway Circuit Criminal Court. The charge was that in January 1994, he had solicited these two men to kill his wife. The first witness for the prosecution was to be Noni Gordon, Philomena's mother, the woman who had said goodbye to her daughter that May morning, the woman who had heard a shot, the matriarch, you could say, of the Gordon family, the first voice the jury was going to hear. Noni Gordon never gave her evidence. She was 76 years old, and she collapsed in the courtroom and she died minutes later. It's heartbreaking, really. In the very building where she had come to bear witness for her child. Just an awful, awful thing. I don't think there are words for what that family went through that day. The whole trial was halted on the spot. The court was adjourned. The family in complete heartbreak and distress all over again. Noni was buried not long after, without ever having got the chance to say a single word. Patrick Gillane's defence then argued that the case could not get a fair hearing in Galway. The death of Noni Gordon in open court had been reported far and wide, talked about, as the defence put it, ad infinitum, in every parish in the country. They argued it could not get a fair trial there, or at least could not be seen to get one. The application went before Judge Raymond Groke. The judge said he was not actually satisfied that injustice would result if the case stayed in Galway, but he accepted the older principle that justice must not just be done, it must be seen to be done. The trial was moved to Dublin, so the case left Galway and headed for the capital. And so in December of 1997, the case went ahead at Dublin Circuit Criminal Court. It was a 6-day trial. Judge Joseph Matthew was the presiding judge. Edward Common, senior counsel for the prosecution, with Shane Murphy, junior counsel, Eamon Leahy, senior counsel for the defence, and a jury of 8 women and 4 men. The prosecution laid out their story. The Dublin meeting in January, the request to kill a woman who worked in a hospital, the money promised, and as for why a man would do such a thing, the prosecution's case to the jury was the affair with Bridie and what Patrick Gillane stood to lose. The prosecution were also very clear with that jury about something else. The case in front of them was a case about solicitation, not murder. Patrick Gillane was not on trial for killing Philomena. He was on trial for what he had allegedly said to these men in Dublin in January of 1994. Bridie Gordon gave evidence about the affair, about the December 1993 row, about everything that had happened in the run-up. The publican from Mount Bellow described Philomena walking into her bar around Christmas 1993, demanding her husband came home and telling him she would take him for every penny he had. The 2 men gave their account of the alleged Dublin meeting. The trial built up piece by piece in front of the 12 jurors. The defence put their case in. The whole thing was nonsense. Patrick Gillane had never been near Houston Station that Sunday. He had never met these 2 men. This was a case of mistaken identity. They went after the visual identification hard. One of the men had not picked Patrick out of a formal identification parade. He had recognised him from a front-page newspaper photograph. Patrick himself had been asked by Gardaí to take part in a formal identification parade, but declined. The defence pointed out that the other man, when he first came forward to Gardaí, had not even mentioned the alleged murder solicitation. That had come later. The first guy had described his man as having a moustache and hazel eyes, but Patrick said he had blue eyes and had never had a moustache in his life. Identifying somebody from a brief meeting years before in a city street, the defence argued, was not reliable enough to convict a man on. And even the two men had told Gardaí at the time that they thought it was a joke. Just talk from a man who had been drinking, not a real request. Judge Joseph Matthews summed up the case for the jury and gave them the warning the law requires in cases that turn on identification. It was dangerous, he told them, to convict on visual identification evidence alone. This case wholly depended on identification. He laid out the cautions and then he sent them out. The jury was back inside 2 hours and 10 minutes later, unanimous, guilty. On the 15th of December 1997, Judge Joseph Matthews passed sentence. And before he did, he said it was difficult to imagine a more vile and vicious crime than a husband soliciting someone to murder his wife. The most he could give him was 10 years. That was the maximum the old 1861 law allowed for this offence. The judge found only 2 things in Patrick Gillane's favour. He had strong testimonials from his parish priest, his GP, 2 local businessmen. And he had no previous convictions. On that basis, the judge settled on 8 years. Bridie Gordon and Paddy Gordon, Philomena's sister and brother, applauded in the courtroom when the verdict was returned. After everything, this was the first conviction connected to Philomena's death. Patrick Gillane wept as he was sentenced. The judge refused him leave to appeal the conviction or the sentence. Patrick Gillane went to the Court of Criminal Appeals anyway, on his own application. The appeal was heard in December 1998 in front of 3 judges, and the defence had several grounds for trying to get the conviction overturned. One of them was a strange one. At some point along the way, one of the men had made a statement about having a microchip in his head. This was one of the guys that he had allegedly met in Dublin, and the defence wanted to use this against him on appeal. If your main witness is somebody who talks like that, the defence put it to the court, how reliable a witness is he really? Should the jury ever have been allowed to rely on him? The court heard them out. But the court said the microchip issue was a small point on the side. The court moved on. The defence had other arguments as well. They argued about how the identification of Patrick had been done in the first place. Going back to the newspaper photograph and the fact that there had been no formal identification parade, they raised procedural arguments about the way the trial itself had been run. And they raised an argument about something called joint solicitation, which in this case was a question about whether asking 2 men together to do a killing should have been treated differently in law than asking one man on his own. The Court of Criminal Appeals sat through all of this, and the court made a point of saying something about these 2 men. The 2 men were, in the court's own description, down and out. But the court said their sworn evidence had to be given the same respect as any other witness, and that the whole case came down to one thing. Did the jury believe these 2 men, or did they believe Patrick Gillane? The jury had believed the 2 men. The court found no valid grounds or reasons to set aside the verdict and rejected every single argument the defence made. The trial judge, the court said, had handled the case in, quote, exemplary fashion. The conviction stood. Patrick Gillane also brought a separate appeal against the 8 years itself. He lost that too a week later, and the court was blunt about why. He had fought the case tooth and nail. He had shown no remorse and no cooperation. He was not the kind of man who pleads guilty and gets something off for it. He had fought every inch of the way and lost. 8 years stood. All of that was a solicitation conviction. That was always what it was. Patrick Gillane was found guilty by a jury in 1997 of asking 2 men in Dublin in January of 1994 to kill his wife. 8 years for solicitation to murder. Appeal dismissed. And that brings us to the part the Gordon family have never accepted. Because what was never proven in any court was who actually killed Philomena. Who came to the Gordon land that May morning? Who fired the shotgun? Who used the knife? Who drove her car all the way to Athlone railway station and walked away from it? The 2 unidentified men reportedly seen near the home that morning have never been publicly named. The 2 men that Patrick Gillane was convicted of asking to kill Philomena, Both told the Gardaí and the court that they had refused and that they had nothing to do with her death. So even on the prosecution's own case, even after the jury's verdict, the question of who actually did this to Philomena was left open. And it has stayed open. The inquest into Philomena's death was opened in June of 1998 in front of coroner Dr. Pat Mangan. The jury returned the medical findings. The inquest was then adjourned at the request of Superintendent Gerard Clifford of Mullingar because the murder investigation was still considered ongoing. It was adjourned to the 24th of June 1999. What happened at the resumed inquest after that adjournment, I could not find a fully verified account of. Where it finally ended, I don't have. And I've trawled through everywhere to try and find it. But the medical cause of death was set on the record in 1998, inflicted by another person. Patrick Gillane served his sentence and was released. The murder file, meanwhile, has stayed open. Now I need to take you back because this actually happened before the Dublin trial, back in June 1995, while Patrick Gillane was still under investigation and Noni Gordon was still alive. And while all of this was going on, the killing was poisoning everybody between the two families. It spilled over badly in June 1995 at the Gillane farm in Glenbrackgurt. There was a confrontation there between the Gillanes and the Gordons. And in the course of it, Philomena's brother Martin Gordon was very seriously injured. He received an abdominal wound from a slash hook, so bad that his intestines were actually exposed. Patrick's brother Kevin Gillane was charged at Galway Circuit Criminal Court with unlawfully wounding Martin Gordon with intent to cause him grievous bodily harm, along with related assault charges. He pleaded not guilty. The first trial of that case collapsed. A mistrial was recorded in April of 1996 after the jury was discharged during the evidence of Noni Gordon, Philomena's mother. A fresh trial opened in Galway that June. At the end of it, Kevin Gillane was acquitted of unlawfully wounding Martin Gordon and acquitted of the assault charge on another Gordon brother, Patrick. But he was found guilty of a lesser charge of common assault on Martin Gordon. And the charges did not run only one way. Assault charges against Philomena's brothers, Patrick and Martin, arising out of the same Glenbrack confrontation were dismissed at Gurt District Court. The judge in the circuit court case, Judge Harvey Kenny, warned both families to stay away from each other. But the point of telling you any of this is this. A woman had been killed. Nobody had been charged with killing her. And the not knowing, the suspicion, the rage on both sides, it had got to the stage where Philomena's own brother had been on the ground with his intestines exposed from the slash hook. That is what an unsolved murder does to the people closest to it. It poisons everything and it keeps poisoning it, years and years afterwards. And the Gordon family had been fighting for Philomena on more than one front. Philomena had been buried in Kilmacdoe Cemetery, a few miles outside Gurt, in Patrick Gillane's part of the county. She'd been laid to rest there beside Patrick's parents. By 1996, the Gordon family in Caltra had made a formal request to have her exhumed from that cemetery and reburied at home beside her own father in the village she had grown up in. The papers had been signed by Philomena's brothers and her sisters and her mother. "We intend going through with this," her mother said. "We'll do our best to have her brought back." She said it would be a great comfort to have Philomena buried near the family home at Caltra. But the papers had not yet been forwarded to the relevant authorities, and the husband's consent was also required for an exhumation. And then Noni herself died before any of it could be settled. Whether the reburial ever actually happened, I can't find it anywhere in the public record. And Philomena's little boy, by the middle of 1995, he was not yet 2 years old, and he was being cared for by one of Patrick's sisters. On the first anniversary of Philomena's death, the Gordons drove over to the house where her son was in 2 cars, and there was confrontations there too, and the Gardaí were called. So you can see how completely the family had been broken open by what had been done to Philomena. And in 2014, 20 years on, Bridie Gordon spoke out again. "We have got no justice," she said, "for the death of Philomena." She called for the murder investigation to be reopened. The local Garda superintendent in Ballinasloe at the time, Superintendent Jerry Roach, said the file remained opened and was reviewed regularly. But he confirmed what the family already knew. Nobody had been charged in relation to the killing itself. That was over 10 years ago now. Since then, there has been no public update, no charges, no arrests, just an open file. And that, to me, is desperate. Philomena Gillane was 41 years old. She was 7 months pregnant with what would have been her second child. She already had a little boy, and whatever life he has had to do it without his mother. Her poor mother not only died in the courtroom waiting to give evidence, it was probably the stress of it all that ended up killing her, and she never got to hear a verdict. She never got to hear a sentence. Somewhere out there is the person or the people responsible for what happened to Philomena. They may still be walking around. They may still be in this country. The fingerprint is on file. The case is on file. The ballistic evidence, the knife evidence, the witness reports of 2 unidentified men near the Gordon home that morning. All of it sits on file, waiting. If anybody listening to this knows anything about what happened to Philomena Gillane on the 11th of May 1994, anything at all, you can contact Gardaí at Ballinasloe Garda Station, or any Garda station, or the Garda Confidential line on 1-800-666-111. Even after all these years, it is still not too late. Somebody knows. Somebody has always known. And I really do believe the Gordon family deserve their answer after everything. Like I always say, Philomena was a daughter, a sister, a mother, a wife, a working woman. She was loved. She is missed. And until somebody somewhere finally tells what they know, we will keep saying that. Thanks for listening, guys, and I'll see you all in the next episode. In the meantime, take care of yourselves. That's it for another episode of Ireland Crimes and Mysteries. Thank you for joining me, and thanks again to our new sponsor, Revive Active. I really hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you're looking to support your health daily, do give Revive Active, the super supplement, a try. It's been Ireland's #1 supplement brand for 5 years now. And being Irish made, you know the quality is there. Whether it's for immune support, health, or just that steady energy to get you through the day, it's a ritual worth starting. Check them out at reviveactive.com or your local pharmacy. I'm Nules, and thank you for your support. And I'll be back next week with another episode of Ireland Crimes and Mysteries.
GoLaid presents Ireland Crimes and Mysteries. Brought to you by Revive Active. Steady energy that works in synergy with your body. Shop the full range at reviveactive.com or in pharmacies or health food stores nationwide.